A legal theory that has long been whispered about by legal experts and veteran prosecutors has spilled out into the open in the wake of Michael Cohen's explosive testimony. The possibility that Donald Trump and the Trump Organization are being investigated as a criminal enterprise. The undercurrents have been there all along, with federal law enforcement officials and lawmakers comparing Donald Trump's conduct to that of a mob boss.
It's like, a Sopranos episode where Tony is going to a, poorly lit parking garage and meeting with a leader from another mob.
This is classic kind of criminal enterprise behavior, right? You have a strong leader who rules by force of will and personality, who demands unquestioned loyalty from those people around him.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange. And I don't do it lightly. And I'm not trying to, by the way, suggest that President Trump is out breaking legs and shaking down shopkeepers. But instead what I'm talking about is that leadership culture constantly comes back to me when I think about my experience with the Trump administration.
And in a piece out today in the New York Times, Garrett Graff describes how pursuing Trump World as a mob operation could take down Trump and his entire empire, writing, quote, indicting the whole Trump organization as a, quote, corrupt enterprise could help prosecutors address the thorny question of whether the president can be indicted in office. They could lay out a whole pattern of criminal activity, indict numerous players, including perhaps Trump family members, and leave the president himself as a named unindicted co-conspirator. Such an action would allow investigators to make public all the known activity for Congress and the public to consider as part of impeachment hearings or re-election. It would also activate powerful forfeiture tools for prosecutors that could allow them to seize the Trump Organization's assets and cut off its income streams. And on the congressional front today, Adam Schiff announcing that he has hired veteran Russian mob prosecutor, do you see a theme emerging, folks? Daniel Goldman, to run the House Intel investigation into the president. It's in the context of this devastating legal peril that the president appears to be spiraling into meltdown mode, tweeting, quote, presidential harassment in his outside voice as a refrain and publicly attacking the numerous investigations into his conduct that are now encircling the White House, his family, his businesses, and his closest allies.
The witch hunt continues. The fact is that I guess we got 81 letters. There was no collusion. That was a hoax. There was no anything. And they want to do that instead of getting legislation passed. 81 people or organizations got letters. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to our country.
And that's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Frank Figliuzzi, former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, is back. Elliot Williams, former deputy assistant attorney general, joins us. Elliot, we should also add, now does work for an organization advocating for the protection of the special counsel. Here at the table, Matthew Miller, a former chief spokesman at the Department of Justice. White House reporter for the LA Times, Eli Stokols, is here. Alyssa Mastromonaco makes her triumphant return to Deadline White House. Former White House deputy chief of staff for President Obama. And Donnie Deutsch is back. I got to start with you, Donnie, because you're sort of like Mel Gibson in that movie where he sees the conspiracy before anybody, that one I'm talking about. People think he's nuts. Julia Roberts believes him, but nobody else. You've been saying this for months.
Yeah. I guess maybe why I had a little forward thinking is just because of 20 years of knowing how the Trump Organization does business and watching all these little pieces fall into place. And you step back, and I also go on the premise of law enforcement is all about stopping the next guy from doing it. And, and I've said this on your show before, we have a president who's basically showed up and tried to dump on 200 years of history, separation of powers, the basic tenets of Madisonian democracy, a free press. So I think these guys, when I say these guys, the Southern District, they want to put him under. I don't think it's just an impeachment. I think they want to take this organization apart, and it is a criminal organization. And if you just look at the things being bandied about, money laundering, bank fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, campaign finance laws, it goes on and on and on and on and on. Think about what we've seen in public while he's president, the nefarious activities. Now imagine, as a private citizen, with nobody watching, with no oversight, what he is capable of doing, and take your wildest imagination, take every white-collar crime you can think of to the nth degree. I'm not talking about physical crimes, but I promise you, this organization will turn it up. And I believe from the beginning, the RICO statute will allow the prosecutors to do everything they want to do. My concern politically is what's going on the Hill. I'm concerned that just with all the oversight committees in Congress, it starts to so clearly get political and allows Trump to start to play the victim a bit. I almost wish everybody would go quiet until the Southern District steps forward and go, here we are. That's not reality.
Start to play the victim?
Exactly. Let me ask you one other question, because you were last here when Michael Cohen was on the Hill. You said something that we didn't really pick up on at the table, but after your appearance, DOJ watchers noted your comment. You said Michael's relationship with SDNY changed. At the time of sentencing, he had a more amicable, productive, I don't know if you used those words, but correct me if they're wrong, relationship with the Mueller investigators, that now the relationship is just as fruitful, just as good with the Southern District prosecutors. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I think people can use their imagination. Obviously, I can't talk about ongoing investigations, but the dynamic
has... Is Michael Cohen still helping them with ongoing investigations?
He's been talking about ongoing investigations, so I think you got to take those words for what they are. The relationship has changed. And I think if you go back to your opening and look at all the pieces that we're hypothesizing about and go, who would be one of the people that could corroborate those pieces or even point to where those pieces are? I think other than Michael Cohen, Mr. Weisselberg will too. I think Weisselberg, as much as we've heard about Cohen, in the next year, you're going to be hearing that name even more.
I started with this RICO piece because, one, I don't think people like me know just enough to be dangerous with this, Frank Figliuzzi, but it is notable that people that had access to a lot more information than we did, someone like Jim Comey, who was head of the FBI when Donald Trump became president, who had access to the counterintelligence investigation that was opened into the Trump campaign in the summer of 2016. Andrew McCabe, who was acting FBI director when the counterintelligence investigation was expanded to include Donald Trump. Eric Swalwell, a member of the House Intel Committee. They've been making these mob analogies for a long time, and we always heard them and went, wow, is that too much? It sounds like law enforcement has known exactly what they're dealing with, exactly how to investigate them, and perhaps, if Donnie's onto something, the prosecutors know exactly how they would prosecute such an enterprise.
Yeah, we're finally starting to see public discussion of what undoubtedly has been discussed in the hallways of Southern District of New York, FBI New York, and probably in Washington as well, which is this concept that while we're all thinking, boy, this sounds like a mob family, the lawyers and agents are saying there's a tool for this. There's a way we address mob families and organizations, and it's called RICO. And the basic notion is that the sum is greater than the parts. So you can go ahead and attack an organization by hitting individuals with prosecutions on this charge and that charge, and it's very unwieldy and it takes a long time, and then you really never essentially get to the boss. RICO is designed to get to the boss, because if you charge the underlings and they don't talk because they use that omerta code, the code of silence, and we've seen that even in this organization, then you may never get him. So RICO says, look, all of this together is much larger than the individual parts, and there's a leader behind this. And that's what RICO's designed to do. And I'll tell you when the light bulb went off over my head, and I said, this has got to be a RICO consideration, which is Michael Cohen's testimony. Michael Cohen's testimony did it for me. This was essentially a mob informant talking about the capo, and I would be surprised if Southern District or some other prosecutive arm is not seriously approaching this as a RICO.
Elliot, let me bring you in on this, and let me ask you to give us some historical analysis, because I again, know just enough to be dangerous, but my read today, based on the New York Times piece I quoted at the top, suggests that one Rudy Giuliani really was a pioneer in using the RICO law, the racketeering statutes, to prosecute mob families in New York City for federal crimes in ways that they hadn't been prosecuted before. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's I hesitate to say turnabout is fair play, but I mean, it is striking that it is Rudy Giuliani at the center of this. This is just as Frank said, this is exactly how you would build a RICO prosecution, by working your way up. And an important fact is that two of the critical players here, which are always two critical players in a RICO organization, are the lawyer and the accountant. So you have Alan Weisselberg and you have Michael Cohen, lawyer and accountant, which in any mob prosecution are always individuals who they have, you have what's called a fiduciary duty, right? They're sharing secrets with the mob boss or whatever. The difference is you can't protect your secrets when they're used to further crimes. And so if Trump was talking to Weisselberg or Cohen about criminal activity, that's all going to get out there. And so absolutely, it is striking that the individual who spent quite successfully, Rudy Giuliani had an amazingly successful tenure as head of the Southern District of New York as the U.S. attorney, but is now so critically tied to the president as he's facing these kinds of investigations. And so we're not going to see the end of this. They're working their way up to the top. And I know we'll talk about Congress later, but you're seeing a similar investigation there where you attack it from all sides, all individuals who might have responsive documents or information, and see what kind of case you can build. But it is striking. I don't want to call the president a mobster, but it's striking how legally similar the techniques you would take to build a case here would be.
I mean, and Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe didn't call him a mobster, but made the same point. It's striking how similar the conduct is. I want to ask you about something Chris Christie said in that chair last week. He said, well, Trump didn't tell him to lie. It would seem that under this statute, he wouldn't have to, that the criminality was implicit and explicit. And if you look at sort of the recent reporting about the latest efforts at obstruction, it wasn't just trying to obstruct the Mueller probe. The president is now on the record, has been reported, and hasn't refuted that he tried to interfere with and obstruct the investigations out of SDNY.
Yeah, what Michael Cohen said that I thought was so interesting in his testimony was, the president didn't actually tell me to lie. He didn't have to. That's not how he works. And if you've been with him long enough, everyone else knows what he means. And if you listen to what Jim Comey said in his testimony back now almost 2 years ago, he knew what the president meant. When the president asked him about the Mike Flynn investigation, he took that as an order. He didn't follow it, but he interpreted it as an order. And I think when you look all around, that's the question that's going to come up over and over again. What did the president mean when he was talking about pardons? What did he mean? What did his attorneys mean when they were talking about pardons? Whenever you get into all this obstructive behavior by the president, you're trying to divine his intent. And the way you divine his intent are by what the people around him took it to mean and what he said to other people. And I think what you will begin to see are more witnesses like Michael Cohen. So we know that some of them are cooperating with the Mueller probe already, obviously people like Mike Flynn. But as we turn the page now to congressional investigations, Michael Cohen isn't going to be the only person coming before Congress and putting his hand in the air and talking openly. There is no good reason why Mike Flynn shouldn't come testify at some point. There's no good reason why Rick Gates shouldn't come testify. Paul Manafort, who's not a cooperator anymore, might be subpoenaed to come testify. If you look at all the people around the president,
you could get a little shuttle bus from federal prison.
There are a lot of people who have been in to talk to Mueller privately, who've been in to talk to the grand jury privately. We may see all of them public in the next year and a half.
Let's see what that looks like. Here is Michael Cohen describing what you just talked about, the understanding that you have to sort of listen to Trump's codes.
You suggested that the president sometimes communicates his wishes indirectly. For example, you said, quote, Mr. Trump did not directly tell me to lie to Congress. That's not how he operates, end quote. Can you explain how he does this?
Sure. It would be no different if I said, that's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen, isn't it? What are you going to do? You're going to fight with him? The answer is no. So you say, yeah, it's the nicest looking tie I've ever seen. That's how he speaks. He doesn't give you questions. He doesn't give you orders. He speaks in a code. And I understand the code because I've been around him for a decade.
And it's your impression that others who work for him understand the code as well?
Most people, yes.
It's striking, as Matt said, Jim Comey testified before Congress under oath that when he was asked to see to it to let Mike Flynn go, let this Mike Flynn thing go, he wasn't told to let it go. He was told to see to it to let Flynn go. The code, and I watched Goodfellas as part of my homework for my day job, this is exactly how mob bosses communicate to their underlings.
Well, right. It's not exactly explicit, but it's pretty close.
Understood.
And, I never dealt with mob bosses, but I covered the Trump campaign. And I remember my first trip up to Trump Tower when Trump was doing well, and they said, maybe you should diversify your portfolio and go start covering Donald Trump. I went up and I met with these people, and you know what they said? They said, hey, we'll be real good to you. We'll get you a lot of access if you're good to us. It was sort of the same mentality. It was a complete lack of understanding about what a reporter's job was, but that wasn't the point to them. No matter who they're dealing with, it was, you know, you want to take care of us, we'll take care of you, but it's loyalty first, and that's how the president has treated people for years, as Donnie and lots of people who've been around him know, and as I think anybody covering him for any period of time also understands.
I want to ask you about the Mueller report. The White House, I think, probably feels that they've done a lot of spade work to sully Mueller's reputation, but it's probably a known unknown what will actually be in it. And Jim Comey adding his voice in an op-ed to the chorus of people saying that some transparency in the Mueller probe is a good thing. You're laughing already. Give me a second. Republicans are wrong now when they claim Justice Department rules forbid transparency about the completed work of the special counsel. It's difficult to imagine a case of greater public interest than one focused on the efforts of a foreign adversary to damage our democracy, and in which the President of the United States is a subject. Don't listen to those who tell you transparency is impossible. Every American should want a Justice Department guided first and always by the public interest. Sometimes transparency is not a hard call. His complicated standing, if you will, aside, the president, if he thinks he's innocent, should agree with Jim Comey here.
Right, and that's not what you see. You see attacks against Jim Comey, you see attacks against McCabe, to a lesser extent, but still some attacks against Robert Mueller, and that has been the strategy.
Lesser extent, he called it BS at CPAC. I mean, the attacks against Mueller.
I think the president has been, relatively more restrained in attacking Mueller.
Okay, you were sleeping off Hanoi during CPAC.
that is true. But I think that generally, look, this president and this operation, what we've seen Rudy Giuliani doing for months, they have tried to do a lot of spade work to prejudice, to sort of inoculate themselves and to prejudice the public against whatever findings come out. And yet there is some concern. At the White House and around the president, he has long told himself, as long as I'm in office, I'm not getting indicted. Well, now that's a legal question that may be less than certain. And I think, just this week, some of the letters and the subpoenas that the president is describing, 81 letters, as he said, they're surprised by that. They've been bracing for this. They've been adding more, firepower in their legal office. But I think what the Democrats are starting to do, I think, is catching them a little bit off guard. And while the president has told people, look, if they come after me, it's going to be good. I'll portray them as all about attacking me and taking me down. They don't have any ideas. He's very good, as Donnie said, at playing the victim. But I think in theory, that's one thing. I think in actuality, it's very different. And I think that privately, the president, while he projects toughness, privately, he's pretty concerned about where this is going, because
and on Twitter,
they don't have they haven't had any answers, any exculpatory information for any of these allegations.
Yeah, look, he's never followed the never let them see you sweat category from the beginning. One of the things I think it's interesting has been the change in response, even over 24 hours. So yesterday, their initial response to these 81, this request for documents from 81 people, the president said, "Oh, we'll cooperate. We cooperate all the time." Sarah Sanders put out a nice statement saying we'll review. By last night, there was this unhinged statement that it was from the Democrats to cover up their agenda.
They saw some Fox News Prime
of socialism.
And they were like, "Oh, we were off message."
That's exactly right. And then you had the president out today lying about it, saying, well, the Obama administration didn't turn over these documents. I know that's not true. I remember going to the House Oversight Committee and reading my emails posted there. I remember the White House turning over documents about Solyndra and Fast and Furious and everything else. There is a long...
I did the same thing, by the way, about Enron and Valerie's Flame.
That's what happens when you work in the White House. They are going to resist turning some of this stuff over, and they will be able to delay some of it. But at the end of the day, we're going to see a lot of these documents, and the president can play the victim. The president can attack the Democrats, but the documents don't lie. The facts don't lie. They're going to come out, and the American people are going to be able to look at them for themselves and see if what the White House he's been running has been corrupt from the beginning.
As far as obstruction of justice, that's going to be never-ending. They brought up Gary Cohn for the first time today. Yeah. Now, the Justice Department was moving forward to see if the AT&T Time Warner merger was legal, and basically, according to reports, and this is no surprise if you know Trump, said to Cohn, kill that deal. I don't like CNN. Another obstruction. This is just something so outside the realm, so nothing to do with Russia, so nothing to do with campaign finance, so nothing to do with money laundering.
Well, let me put that to you, Frank. Is it possible that if the obstruction of justice is what Donnie just described, ongoing daily conduct, that Mueller has to offload that somewhere to another office or another place to pursue it? Because as Donnie says, it's hard to find an end point to that conduct.
I think so, and I think the logical, breakage there would be, look, if the obstruction is dealing directly with something within Mueller's remit, he takes it, he addresses it in his report, or even spins off the prosecution somewhere. And then if it's not related to his remit, he hands that obstruction angle off to the appropriate office. What I'm going to be interested in and watching closely, Nicole, is the interplay between the contents and tone of Mueller's report and the optics and perception and how Trump's going to use it with regard to the congressional inquiries, right? Mm-hmm. So, rightly or wrongly, whatever Mueller says or includes or chooses not to is going to impact the public's perception of what Congress is doing and whether Congress should or should not be pursuing something. And Trump is going to use it in that fashion and try to drive a wedge and say, so for example, no collusion found, Congress should stop what they're doing, even though the two are not linked, right? Crimes, Russia, conspiracy. But that's got to be carefully calculated as well. Jim Comey's right. We need more details rather than less. It's an unprecedented time in our history. Applying criminal standards to how we shape this Mueller report will not work for us.
Alyssa, there's something about watching this White House brace for a real crisis. They don't pull off the easy days. They don't pull off trips to cemeteries on foreign trips to honor veterans. They don't pull off low-hanging fruit. They don't utter, platitudes about members of Congress with cancer. I mean, they don't pull off the easy things. How are they going to brace for this?
So this was something that, I have worried about all along. Being Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, working in the White House, everyone has their job. You have your role, you have your responsibility, you have your remit. The president's schedule is the organizing principle around what everyone is doing in the White House. They don't do anything. You don't know what anybody's doing, and 50% of them are trying to save themselves.
50?
Let's say 75. Okay, I was going to be generous, but 75. And they're all trying to save themselves. So it has to be some sort of circular firing squad in that West Wing every single day. And, I guess the best thing that we can hope for is this all gets handled before there's like a real American crisis or emergency that needs to be handled, but they're all too busy with their lawyers trying to figure out who's not going to go down.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.